I am standing under a chandelier with a half-full glass of water in my hand, while my ex-wife smiles across a banquet table like she has been waiting all week for this moment. Her name was Olivia Grant, and even after the divorce, she still knew exactly where to place the knife. She had invited me to a charity dinner through mutual friends, told everyone she wanted things to feel civil, then seated me beside a woman she clearly thought would turn into the evening's punchline. A few people laughed when Olivia said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Daniel always said he liked quiet women." I figured this was finally his chance. The woman beside me lowered her eyes for 1 second, then lifted them again with a calm I still remember. I had already walked away from the house, most of our savings, and the life I thought marriage was supposed to become. If this story touched you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it today. What Olivia didn't know was that silence had never frightened me. Cruelty did. I turned to the woman beside me and signed, slowly, so there would be no room for misunderstanding. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm sorry. You don't deserve this." The room went so quiet, I could hear the ice settle in someone's glass. She blinked once, surprised, then signed back, "Neither do you." That was the first moment Nora Whitaker smiled at me. Most people think humiliation is loud. They imagine slammed doors, pointed fingers, broken plates. But the worst kind is usually soft. It comes wrapped in polished voices and well-set tables, and people pretending they didn't hear what was just said. That was how Olivia had always done it. We had been married for 9 years, and for most of them I had confused embarrassment with compromise. She came from the kind of family that cared about appearances more than truth. They liked tailored coats, firm handshakes, expensive centerpieces, and stories that made them sound generous. I was a commercial draftsman from a quieter side of town who had built my career with long hours and second-hand tools. At first, Olivia said that was what she admired about me. Later, she treated it like something she had rescued me from. When my contracts dried up after a rough year and we started arguing about money, she began to narrate my life for other people before I could speak for myself. To her friends, I was lost. To her mother, I was too sensitive. To a couple we used to have dinner with, I was struggling with confidence. By the time the divorce papers were signed, Olivia had managed to turn my exhaustion into a personality flaw. I moved into a thin-walled apartment above an old shoe repair shop on the east side of Columbus. The radiator clanked at night like someone knocking from inside the walls. I had a card table for a desk, 2 mismatched dishes, and 1 lamp that only worked if I twisted the bulb just right. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things back then. But none of that prepared me for the charity dinner 6 months later, when Olivia decided to make me part of the evening's entertainment. Nora sat very still beside me while the people around us shifted in their seats. Some stared at their plates. Some looked at Olivia with the embarrassed loyalty people wear when they know a joke has gone too far, but do not want to lose their place in the room. Olivia's new boyfriend, Mark Ellison, gave a small laugh and reached for his napkin as if this were all harmless. Someone at the far end of the table muttered, "Well, that's unexpected." Nora touched the folded place card in front of her, then looked at me again. She was wearing a dark green dress, simple silver earrings, and the kind of expression that told me she had spent years watching people underestimate her. I signed, "Would you like to leave?" She glanced around the room first, not because she needed permission, because she wanted to measure the damage. Then she signed, "Not yet." So I stayed. I sat down beside her as if nothing was wrong, unfolded my napkin, and asked in sign language whether she wanted sparkling water or still. The woman across from us nearly dropped her fork. Mark stopped smiling. Olivia's face changed in a way I can still picture with painful clarity. It wasn't guilt, it was irritation. Her little performance had gone off script, and she hated losing control. Nora signed that sparkling was fine. I poured it for her. Then I looked up at Olivia and said, in the same calm voice I used when reading dimensions off blueprints, "You should have told me Nora was coming. I would have thanked you for introducing us under better circumstances." Nobody said anything. You learn a lot about people in the seconds after they are denied the reaction they were hoping for. Olivia had expected anger or shame. Maybe a sharp comment she could later describe as proof that I had always been difficult. What she got instead was a room full of witnesses and a joke collapsing under its own ugliness. Dinner moved on, because that is what social people do when truth enters the room. They adjust their posture and keep chewing. Nora and I spoke in sign for most of the first course. I learned when she was 11 that hearing people often panic around silence, so I kept my movements measured and clear. My younger sister had lost most of her hearing after an illness when we were kids, and I had learned to sign because I got tired of watching adults speak around her instead of to her. Years later, after my sister married and moved to Oregon, I kept practicing. It felt like a way of staying honest. You cannot fake attention in sign language. Your hands may carry the words, but your face tells the truth. Nora worked as an accessibility consultant for art spaces and local nonprofits. She had only come to the dinner because one of the organizers had told her the foundation wanted advice on inclusive programming. No one had mentioned Olivia. No one had mentioned me. She invited me to be part of a joke, Nora signed, her expression unreadable. "Yes," I signed back. And she expected me not to notice. "Yes." She let out the smallest breath through her nose, not quite a laugh. "That gets old." I nodded. "I know." But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. When the salads were cleared, Olivia stood to thank the donors. She had always loved a microphone. She adjusted it with one hand, smiled at the room, and started talking about community, kindness, and the importance of seeing one another clearly. The hypocrisy was so sharp, it almost felt theatrical. Halfway through her speech, Nora set down her fork and looked at me. Then she rose from her chair. The room shifted again. Nora did not ask for the microphone. She did not need to. She tapped a spoon lightly against her glass, and people turned because they were already uneasy. Then she signed. I stood beside her and voiced her words for the room. "My name is Nora Whitaker," she said through my voice. "I was invited here to discuss accessibility. Instead, I was seated at a table like a prop in someone else's joke. I want to be clear about something. Being deaf is not humiliating. Being cruel should be." The silence after that felt clean. Olivia's mouth parted, then closed. Nora continued. "Mr. Mercer has treated me with more respect in 10 minutes than some people manage in a lifetime. If anyone here is embarrassed tonight, it should not be us." I translated every word exactly. Mark stared at the tablecloth. One of the older donors removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. At the far wall, a young man from the sound booth looked over with a face that suggested he had heard enough of these polished rooms to know what was real when it finally showed up. Nora touched my sleeve very lightly. "Now I'd like to leave." This time I didn't hesitate. I stood, took my jacket from the back of my chair, and said to the room, "Thank you for dinner." That was all. I did not accuse Olivia. I did not ask anyone to choose sides. I did not stay long enough to watch people rearrange their consciences. Nora and I walked toward the doors together, while the chandelier light followed us across the carpet. Behind us, I could hear the rough whisper of chairs moving and one woman telling Olivia, "You should have thought that through." Outside, rain was ticking softly against the hotel awning. The valet lane shone with reflected light. Nora crossed her arms against the cold and looked up at me. "Coffee?" I signed. She smiled again. "Only if it's somewhere with bad lighting and honest people." The diner we found 2 blocks away had fogged windows, chipped mugs, and a waitress who called everyone honey. We sat in a corner booth near the pie case while rain streaked the glass. I bought her coffee, and she bought a slice of apple pie neither of us really needed. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders lower. Nora asked about the divorce in careful, direct questions. I told her only the truth. Olivia had spent years sanding me down in private, then calling it refinement. By the end, I no longer recognized my own voice in a room. When I lost 2 big contracts and could not replace them fast enough, she treated my fear like personal inconvenience. The divorce itself had been civilized on paper and brutal everywhere else. "She wanted you smaller than she was," Nora signed. I looked at the steam above my cup. "Yes." She nodded once, like a person placing a fact where it belonged. When we left the diner, the rain had slowed to a fine mist. At the hotel curb, the same young man from the sound booth hurried toward us in a dark windbreaker. He looked barely 30, with tired eyes and a lanyard still hanging from his neck. He held out a plain white envelope. "You might need this someday," he said. Before I could ask what he meant, he added, "I was running audio in the back. I heard more than the room did." There was no name on the front, only mine written in neat block letters. I thanked him, but he was already backing away toward the hotel entrance. Nora looked at the envelope. "What is it?" "I don't know," I said. I put it in my coat pocket and drove home under a sky that never fully cleared. That night, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and turned the white envelope over in my hands for almost an hour before opening it. Inside was a business card for Isaac Hale Audio Services and a small handwritten note. "If she causes trouble, call me." I saved the recordings. I set the card on the windowsill and stared at it until the streetlights blurred. For a long time, I told myself I would never need it. I wanted distance, not another fight. I wanted work, rent money, sleep.
I wanted a week in which no one spoke Olivia's name. A few weeks later, Nora called me about a community theater downtown that needed help redesigning its entryway and seating map. They didn't have money for a large firm, and they needed someone who understood both space and dignity. The pay was modest, but it was real. $740 for drawings, site revisions, and 2 meetings with the board. I remember cashing that first check and standing in the grocery store holding a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and 2 cans of tomato soup like they were evidence that my life had not ended after all. That was the first visible thing I built after the marriage failed. Nora and I worked well together because neither of us mistook pity for kindness. She corrected me when my design ideas made things technically compliant but emotionally clumsy. I showed her how budget lines could swallow good intentions if no one pushed back. We met in coffee shops, walked old hallways with peeling paint, and spent long afternoons at folding tables covered in measurements and grant forms. Months passed. I picked up drafting work for contractors during the day and redrew accessibility plans at night. Twice a week, sometimes more, I sent proposals to small businesses and community spaces that needed renovations they could actually afford. Most never answered. Some replied with polite rejections. Once, after a 12-hour day, I came home to a final notice taped to my apartment door because I had been late on the electric bill. I sat on the floor that evening eating lukewarm tomato soup from the pot because I was too tired to wash a bowl. Loneliness has a sound. It is the refrigerator humming in a room with no other voice. I nearly quit that winter. The radiator had stopped working properly, and I was using an old space heater that smelled faintly of dust. I had 3 proposals out, no guarantee any would land, and less than $200 in my checking account. I remember standing at the sink before dawn, looking out at a gray alley crusted with dirty snow, wondering whether I had been foolish to believe I could rebuild from skill alone. Then my phone lit up. It was Nora. Her message was short. "A museum in Dayton wants a consult. Don't say no before you hear the number." I laughed for the first time in days. What I learned the following week changed everything. The museum could not afford the kind of architectural firm they thought they needed, but they could afford me. The director had seen the theater work, liked the way we talked about access as welcome rather than obligation, and offered us a trial project. It led to another, then another. Not glamorous,
Not easy, but steady. We rented a small office above a bakery the next spring. The floors sloped slightly, and the window stuck when it rained, but it had room for 2 desks and a drafting table, and in the mornings the hallway smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. I bought a second-hand filing cabinet. Nora brought a plant that survived everything. We painted one wall a soft gray because it made the light less harsh in the afternoons. Quiet triumph rarely looks like triumph when you are living it. Sometimes it looks like paying a bill the day it arrives. Sometimes it looks like hiring a part-time assistant named Leah Benton, who knows how to keep permits from disappearing into city offices. Sometimes it looks like realizing you have gone an entire week without rehearsing an argument in your head. By then, Nora had become my closest friend. People around us assumed romance, because that is often the only story they know how to tell. The truth was slower and better than that. She did not rush me toward healing, and I never treated her patience like a debt. We built trust in ordinary ways. Shared work, long walks after site visits, coffee gone cold during good conversations. One afternoon, while we were reviewing plans for a neighborhood library, she signed, "You still keep that card, don't you?" I knew exactly which one she meant. Isaac Hale's business card was still in the top drawer of my desk, tucked beneath a box of paper clips and 3 old receipts. "Yes," I signed. "Why?" Because some part of me knew Olivia wasn't finished. Nora studied me for a moment, then nodded. People like that usually aren't. She was right. Around the 2nd year of the business, after we had enough work to stop counting every gallon of gas, I started hearing Olivia's name again. Leah mentioned seeing Mark at a city fundraiser. An old mutual friend sent me a stiff message asking if I would consider letting the past soften. Someone else hinted that Olivia had been telling people I'd turned that charity dinner into a performance, that I had used Nora to embarrass her publicly because I couldn't handle being left. That kind of lie is designed to reopen an old wound. It says the story you lived can still be taken from you. I wasn't there to win anyone back. I wasn't there to prove I was lovable. I was there for one reason only: to protect what I had built. The library project was the biggest opportunity we had seen yet. A renovation of a historic branch on the west side, funded partly by the city and partly by private donors. It mattered because it would keep our small firm stable for a year, maybe longer. It mattered because the plans were good. It mattered because the children who used that building deserved better than a narrow ramp hidden near a loading entrance. Then Leah came into my office with a tight expression and closed the door behind her. "Olivia's on the donor advisory panel," she said, "and someone has been circulating concerns about your professionalism." I leaned back slowly. "What concerns?" Leah hesitated. that you exploit disability for business, that the story about the gala was staged, that Nora works with you because you used her humiliation to market yourselves. My hands went cold. In the other room, Nora was laughing at something a contractor had texted her. The sound didn't reach me, but I could see it in the shape of her shoulders through the glass. Have you ever been spoken over by people who never once stayed to watch what your life became after they were done describing it? That kind of betrayal doesn't bruise the skin. It tries to colonize memory. I opened the top drawer and took out Isaac Hale's card. Nora met my eyes from across the office, saw the card in my hand, and understood without asking. She came in, closed the door, and waited. "I think it's time," I said. Not long after, I called the number. Isaac answered on the second ring. He remembered me immediately. He said he had wondered whether I would ever use the recordings. He had kept them because the dinner audio had continued in the hallway and prep room before guests arrived. Olivia had been wearing a live lapel mic for her speech rehearsal. She had forgotten it was on. I drove to meet Isaac at a small production office near the river on a windy Thursday afternoon. The windows rattled in their frames, and loose paper skated along the sidewalk outside. He handed me a flash drive inside the same kind of plain white envelope he had given me that night. "I'm not doing this for revenge," he said. "I just got tired of watching people with power mistake that for character." Back at our office, Nora and I listened together. The file began with dishes clinking and staff voices in the background. Then Olivia's voice came through, crisp and unmistakable. "Put him next to the deaf consultant," she said. "He hates being uncomfortable. He'll fold in 10 seconds. Someone else laughed. Then Olivia again. "Honestly, it'll be like watching a man drown in 2 feet of water. Maybe it'll teach him not to show up where he isn't wanted." There was more. Enough more. No shouting. No ambiguity. Just a person revealing herself when she thought only her allies could hear. Nora sat very still through the whole recording. When it ended, she reached for the flash drive and turned it over in her hand. "The truth doesn't always arrive when you want it," she signed. "It arrives when it's ready." That sentence stayed with me. The advisory panel scheduled a final review meeting for the library contract 2 weeks later. Olivia would be there. Mark would be there. So would city staff, donors, and 2 community board members who had known us only through the work. By the time I arrived, a summer storm had started moving over the city. Rain hit the tall library windows in hard diagonal lines, and the meeting room smelled faintly of damp coats and old paper. I carried our project binder in one hand and the white envelope in the other. Olivia looked almost pleased to see me. That told me she still believed the old version of the story. The one where I would either apologize for existing or lose my temper and make her case for her. She began before I sat down. "I just want the panel to consider all dimensions of representation," she said smoothly. "Some people are very skilled at creating narratives that make them look compassionate." I placed the binder on the table. Then I placed the white envelope beside it. "I agree," I said. "Accuracy matters." She kept smiling, but something in her face shifted. The chair of the panel invited me to respond. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I simply explained our work, our references, our completed projects, and the way Nora's expertise shaped every design decision we made. Then I said there was one more thing the panel deserved to hear before making a decision about anyone's character. Isaac had already supplied a certification statement for the audio, along with timestamps and event documentation. Leah distributed copies. Nora sat beside me, composed and unreadable. When the recording played, the room changed one breath at a time.
Olivia's first line hit the table like a dropped glass. By the second line, Mark had gone pale. One donor closed his notebook and stopped pretending to take notes. Another looked directly at Nora for the first time all afternoon, not with pity, but with the shame of someone recognizing he had almost helped a lie survive. When the audio ended, no one rushed to fill the silence. Olivia looked at me, then at the panel, and finally at Nora. "It was a private joke," she said, but even she could hear how small that sounded. Nora's reply was the only one that mattered. She leaned forward and signed, and I voiced her words with a steadiness I did not know I still had. "No," she said. It was an honest moment. "That's why you're afraid of it." I wasn't there to fight. I was there to tell the truth. The panel chair thanked us and asked Olivia to step outside while they reviewed the material. She left without looking back. Mark followed a few seconds later, shoulders bent in a way I had never seen before. We waited in the old quiet of that library room while rain pressed against the windows. A strange thing happens when a lie finally collapses. You don't feel joy first. You feel space. The panel awarded us the project that afternoon. Olivia was removed from the advisory group before the week was over. A few apologies arrived after that, careful and late. I accepted some. Others I let sit unanswered. Not because I was bitter, because peace also has boundaries. When the meeting ended, I gathered the binder and thanked the panel for their time. Outside in the covered parking lot, Olivia was waiting beside her car. Rainwater ran in silver lines from the concrete ceiling. Her makeup had softened at the edges, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked less polished than tired. "You made me look cruel," she said. I almost answered quickly. Instead, I let the silence do what it had always done best. It stripped everything unnecessary away. Then I said, "No, Olivia. I stopped helping you look kind." That was all I gave her. She lowered her eyes. In 9 years of marriage, I had seen her angry, superior, dismissive, wounded, and performative. I had never seen her without an audience. I walked past her into the cooling evening where Nora was standing under the awning, one hand in her coat pocket, the storm already thinning into a soft gray drizzle. She didn't ask what Olivia had said. She only fell into step beside me as we crossed the lot. We didn't speak much on the drive back to the office. We didn't need to. Some victories are too quiet to survive being announced. Later that night, after Leah had gone home and the bakery downstairs had turned off its lights, I stood by the open window in my office while the city settled into itself. The rain had stopped. The street below shone dark and clean, and somewhere far off, a siren moved through the distance without urgency. Nora was in the next room locking a file cabinet, humming under her breath in a rhythm she felt rather than heard. The plant on her desk bent slightly toward the glass. The white envelope lay folded in my drawer, no longer heavy. I thought about the man I had been at that banquet table, standing under borrowed light while someone tried to make a joke out of another human being and expected me to disappear inside the shame of it. I never needed their approval to become who I was meant to be. I only needed the courage to stop performing for rooms that had already decided not to see me. When I finally turned from the window, the last of the storm was drifting east, and the wet street below held the fading light like a promise no one needed to say out loud.